Well, time now to shift our focus. We're going to look at, well, vigilantism here in South Africa. Communities taking the law into their own hands. It's been steadily on the rise in South Africa over the last couple of years. In Khayeltisha in Cape Town alone, 18 mob killings have been reported in the last 7 months. Necklace murders where a tyre doused in petrol is lit around the body of its victim. This is resurfaced as a punishment for alleged criminals. Often the victims are falsely accused. Now, in a country where 49 murders are committed every day, at times the frustration of communities can be understood. But this can never be condoned. The rule of law needs to be respected if innocent lives are to be saved. Now, to help us unpack what seems to be a growing trend of vigilantism in the country, we're joined by Professor Kopano Ratele, who's an expert in violent masculinity. Very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you.
What's your view? Why do we see this rise in vigilantism around the communities here in South Africa?
The failure is at multiple levels. One is of course, the loss of faith in the criminal justice system. People are taking the law into their own hands, and this is absolutely never, ever justifiable. But it basically means that people do not have lost trust, do not have enough adequate trust in the police systems. But also one has to realize that there are other levels of the problem. The problem is if you have one person in a neighborhood who has no prospect, is unemployed, you have a criminal. But if you have a number of young men, young women unemployed in a neighborhood, you already have the conditions for both gangsterism but also vigilantism.
What about the legacy problems? We see the rise of necklace killings again, which is very concerning in this sort of space that we're talking about. Would you say our violent past from the apartheid securities and the necklacing methods that used to be used in our communities, this resurfacing, is there any connection in your mind?
Theoretically, yes. I mean, conceptually, one has to start to think about that history, the history both of an oppressive regime, the apartheid security forces, but also the 1980s saw this unjustifiable, this horrible means of punishing people who were impimpies, and necklacing was called for by some for political leaders. So the after effects of apartheid trauma and now post-apartheid trauma have not been dealt with adequately. I think you still need a massive campaign to both increase levels of mental health services, but also, as I said, some of the problems are current. They are contemporary in the sense of if you have a large number of young men who are unemployed, you already have the conditions for taking out their frustrations in other ways, including, of course, some of these are not vigilantism. So you might have people taking refuge in alcohol, in drugs, but also in criminality. And clearly, vigilantism is part of that. Vigilantism is the flip side of criminality.
We've done a poll here. I just want to flip up this poll and just tell you what this poll says. There we have the poll. The question we ask is vigilantism justifiable? Now, 0% say yes, 40% say no, but 60%, Professor, say it depends. What does that say about the mentality that is out there in South Africa right now with regards to taking the law into your own hands?
Well, you know, this poll, of course, is indicative because there's all kinds of methodology. But it worries me that you have so many people thinking that there are conditions where vigilantism is justifiable. It is absolutely not justifiable. But hang on, the problem, as we said, is if people do not feel confident in the law bringing to justice the people who are committing crimes, who are selling drugs, they will take the law into their own hands. But this is never justifiable. So the solution to this, of course, is to strengthen the rule of law, strengthen both policing. But this is not kragdadigheid. This is not police coming in with full force. It's to understand what are the conditions that produces vigilantism, but also the conditions that bring about the huge body count, the criminality, the crime incidences, but also the other kinds of events such as road rage, because there is a lot of both aggression, of rage, and violence in this country, as we saw with the police figures that were released a few weeks back.
You mentioned road rage, and I want to talk about the connection between all of these upsurges in violent incidents. Do you see this connection, and how do we break this cycle?
Well, there is a connection. Actually, there are multiple connections. One is every time you look at the visuals of the people who are involved in vigilantism, you start to see that most of the people would be young males, but also other kinds of males. So at the same time, the people who you see who are perpetrating violence against both men and women are males. So males in that particular case are both victims and perpetrators. And other kinds of incidences, events, incidences, and forms of violence, men are overrepresented, and young men in particular. So there's a connection between the different forms of violence and a particular way of thinking about what it means to be masculine in this country. And it's a particular form of masculinity that we see in the country. And one of this is precisely this aggression, this rage, which might be due to a host of reasons that I've just indicated. Unemployment, poverty, lack of prospects, not being in school, drug taking, but also living in neighborhoods that are just unviable. Well,
Professor, we've run out of time, but this is a scenario that we're going to talk about hopefully for the weeks and months to come, because it continues to rear its ugly head here in South Africa. The fabric of our society really at risk a little bit. Hyper-masculinity, you say, is at the heart of it then?
Yes, indeed.
I thank you for joining us. That's Professor Kopano Ratele, who talks about hyper-masculinity, the key issue, the key problem that South Africa faces within the high levels of violence within our communities across the board. Time for us